Hello and welcome to another edition of the Schooner Pod. We're taking a look at the Ole Miss perspective. And now normally these episodes are called from the fan perspective, but we're classing things up here on the Schooner Pod. We've brought on Sam Hutchens, beat writer for the Ole Miss Rebels, for the Clarion Ledger. I believe I pronounced that right? Right,
That's right.
Clarion?
Yeah.
Fantastic. So we're already off to a great start. Sam, welcome back to Oklahoma. You're a native through and through, so it's good to have you back in the Sooner State.
Yeah, it's awesome to I haven't been back here in a year, so to fly in and get back late last night and see the home of the 2025 champions Thunder sign and there's new stuff going up, but yeah, it's great to be back, no doubt.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, the Rebels have had a really terrific year. I think there are a lot of question marks entering this. Obviously, a lot of players going out, no Jackson Dart, but the quarterback position has turned out, I think, there are some people entering the year super optimistic about Austin Simmons. It's taken a turn, but a turn for the better with Trinidad Champs. How has that quarterback situation been at Ole Miss? Obviously, very interesting. How is that sort of panned out with Trinidad taking that lead job?
Yeah, it truly did. It required a shift in focus and thought because, as you kind of mentioned, in the offseason, really since the day Jackson Dart was drafted, Austin Simmons was the guy, right? And I think in this day and age of college football, if you have a young quarterback who you're committed to and plan on, anointing him the job, you kind of have to do that publicly because you're probably paying him a whole lot, and the transfer portal is always calling. So if you are going to commit to a guy, it sort of does make sense to do it in the offseason and not run a competition you don't think will be one. And just so in the offseason, the whole drumbeat was Austin Simmons. And he was solid. He wasn't great in his first two games as a full-time starter. But yeah, since he got hurt and Trinidad Chambliss started in week 3, Chambliss has been great for the vast majority of when he's been on the field. So yeah, he came from Ferris State, so it was definitely a lot of researching what Ferris State was, where he was at, and what exactly can this guy do. But yeah, the way he's been playing, it seems like the ceiling of this team is really high with him.
Yeah, absolutely. The Rebels obviously only one loss, tough one to Georgia in Athens last week. What happened there? They were flying high, kind of a brutal. It looked fourth quarter. What kind of went down in Athens for those Sooner fans who might not have been as locked in?
Yeah, it. I'm not actually. I don't think anyone's quite sure because the short of it is Trinidad Chambliss looked in the offense as a whole looked great to start the game. They went, I'll say it because it's ridiculous. Touchdown, 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 right? To start the game 5 straight. So it looked great. And then in the fourth quarter, Ole Miss had 13 total yards. And it was like, whoa, it was just kind of an immediate switch. And some of that was Trinidad missed some throws. And he was the first to tell you, yeah, he missed some throws, which he usually has hit. Like a lot of people focus on his rushing ability, which is a huge strength, but he's had and shown great touch that just wasn't there in the fourth quarter for whatever reason. And I think part of that is when you miss one throw, then you're behind the chains and you need a harder throw on 2nd and 10 and then, 3rd and 8 or whatever. And it did dry up in a tough road atmosphere. And yeah, the OU with what OU's got, there's potential for things to dry up again, with that strong defense. So it'll be interesting to see how Ole Miss does.
Well, absolutely. And, Ole Miss is certainly the toughest offense Oklahoma's faced this year. So it's very much a strength on strength situation. Really kind of, irresistible versus immovable, which I think will be just, those are the best type of matchups, I feel
Oh
like,
yeah. Oh yeah.
without a
Do you
doubt.
think it'll be high scoring or low scoring? Because you could talk me into either.
Right. Yeah. That's the thing. And I believe Josh Pate has a very interesting theory he calls it the crowbar theory, where, in some of these matchups, you see an offense completely grind to a halt, if you face a good defense. And I don't think we've really seen Ole Miss hit that yet. There have been less productive outputs. I think the Washington State game seemed pretty uninspiring. But this Oklahoma defense, if you had to point to one thing that they're not great at, it's a tendency to give up explosives. I feel like Ole Miss is a team that can certainly produce some, explosives, primarily with Stribling, a guy who also is
Absolutely.
no
Yeah.
stranger to the Sooner State.
Yeah, he had that huge, I think it was 75 yard touchdown against Georgia, and that was big. Stribling, I know, I think this is maybe a little bit of Lane Kiffin having some fun, but he wasn't a huge part of the offense until Ole Miss played Washington State. And that's where Stribling was before Oklahoma State. So suddenly against his old team, he got a ton of targets in the first half and looked great. And yeah, he was kind of forecast as one of the guys coming in who would be a huge presence on the outside. And he's kind of come into his own these last couple games and delivered that. Yeah, most strikingly by that huge touchdown against Georgia. Yeah, he's one to watch. And then the other guy would be Harrison Wallace. They may call him Trey Wallace on the broadcast, but he's a transfer from Penn State that he and Stribling are kind of on the outside, and they have a tendency to get loose. They do.
Yeah, so definitely a lot to look forward there. The secondary outside of, Auburn with Cam Coleman hasn't been overly stressed, I believe. Well, Ole Miss offers this different, from what I can tell, pretty deep approach that, you can kind of get attacked from multiple directions. So I think that's going to be very intriguing to see how that, kind of holds up. And speaking of Lane, obviously, not one to shy away from attention in the microphone. Where do you start? I feel like there are multiple storylines we can grab onto here, but let's hop on the one kind of focused on this game. His comments at his presser where he mentioned, Brent Venables' tendency for looking at signs, that sort of deal. I noticed some OU fans kind of getting onto Lane on that post you had. I
Yeah.
don't know. How did you take that?
Yeah, I understood that there was some room for interpretation there, and there usually is with some of Lane's comments. As far as what Kiffin himself said about Brent Venables and his ability to decipher signs, and not only decipher signs, but have the confidence to call against them, I took that as a really genuine compliment from Kiffin to Venables. And I think that maybe the guy intentionally or not, caught in the crossfire that Lane likes to prod at is Hugh Freeze. So I think that maybe if anyone had the right to be upset, it's Freeze. But yeah, some folks were, of course, telling me, hey, maybe it was just a good play, maybe it was instinct. And I was just looking for a play in that game that kind of illustrated what Kiffin could be talking about here's a safety who crashes hard on a slant route in the middle of the fields. Yeah, it was with Kiffin. I'm never quite sure what's a true compliment, maybe what's a thinly veiled blast, or maybe something that's a little bit of both. But just from the past context of how Kiffin has talked about Venables, and even when the OU defense and OU was having a rough first year, Kiffin always seemed pretty confident that Venables would get the ship up and running like he has. So I took that as a pretty genuine compliment from Kiffin to Venables.
Yeah, for sure. And, I think the word signs can get people a little riled up these days in a
Yes.
post Connor Stallions world. And, it's a situation where, tendencies, things you notice, OU's defense is very intelligent in terms of doing their homework, knowing what to do. You'll see them call things out that they've seen on tape, and I think I'm on your side. I think it's a compliment. I think OU fans, I love them to death. I am one of them. Can get a little sensitive, a little touchy from time to time. That's just part of it. That's part of it. Uh, but the other Kiffin deal, and I promise we'll get into the actual football. So back away from the Lane stuff. Obviously, Florida job comes open. A lot of rumors there. Has that impacted the mood, the vibe in Oxford at all, or is it still just a little bit of outside noise?
The vibe in Oxford is definitely impacted. And I think in terms of this game, a win would do a lot to quiet some fears and quiet some doubters and ramp down the intensity level, whereas a loss in Norman would continue to ramp those up, and it would be more of a madhouse. This is all building toward when Ole Miss hosts Florida in like 1 month from now. If there's no resolution by then, if Lane hasn't signed a long-term deal with Ole Miss, which he may or may not, pull a Signetti and say I want to be here, but that game will be a zoo if there's no resolution by that point. But yeah, the way I look at it is Florida has to offer more than Auburn did in 2022, because you'll remember, Bobby, Kiffin almost went to Auburn, and it was, as he tells it, very close until, his version of the story in the Many Lives of Lane Kiffin documentary was his daughter Landry came up and, gave him a pitch, almost like a PowerPoint. Hey, we want you to stay. And he did. And now if you look at what has changed around Oxford personally, the things that swayed him the first time, now his son lives here and is a quarterback on the Oxford High Chargers. His ex-wife has moved here. So Florida is probably, I think their pitch is stronger as a university than Auburn, but it needs to be stronger than the one Kiffin rejected in 2022, because Kiffin has turned it down. And so we'll see. We'll see what happens. A win or a loss will go a long way towards shaping the dialogue and the discussion in the next month, I feel like.
For sure. And what Kiffin has built in Oxford is that is a really strong program, and it is hard to go somewhere else and start from scratch. I'm not sure if I feel like Napier has left it in a place where you could. It's not bare bones. You could scoop it up if you're Lane, but it's hard to rebuild something. And from what I can tell on the outside in, is Lane's beloved at Ole Miss. That he coaches like him don't come along every cycle or so. So it's a hard thing to give up, and expectation and set yourself up for higher expectations. The grass isn't always greener. He probably knows that a little bit from his move from Tennessee to USC.
That's right. That's very right. Yeah. I think Kiffin has talked a lot about loving Oxford and the slow pace of life and understanding that there's more to life than being a ball coach. And Oxford has been a good way for him to reconnect with his family. But hey, now that relationship is stored and great, and he's been here for 6 years, which is his longest stop professionally. Kind of hard to believe.
That is hard.
So,
wow, that is really hard to believe.
Florida, at least you can watch their national championship highlights in color TV. And, there's Ole Miss claims national championships from the 60s, but that'll be Florida's pitch. My question is, in this day and age where college athletics is ever changing and NIL matters so much more than maybe history, like, does a national championship from the Urban Meyer days, does that help all that much winning a new one? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're right. The sport's clearly different, and I mean, you can succeed if you have the resources, if you have the backing of your boosters, the athletic department. You can succeed anywhere. I mean, look at what's happening at Texas Tech. With Joey McGuire
Sure.
and everything going on. With Cody Campbell, all that. You can succeed in Lubbock, Texas. You can definitely succeed in Oxford, Mississippi. In the SEC.
Right.
So I'm intrigued to see how all that plays out. But back to the football a little bit. We're kind of all over the place. That's okay. We're having fun
That's
here.
Good, yeah.
Yeah, it's a loose flowing conversation between two old friends here. So talking a little bit about the strength of OU's defense, Ole Miss's offense. Are there any concerns that you have, with Ole Miss's offense against the Sooners defense? Any points that you're like, I could see this being, a bit of a cog in the system here?
Yeah, I wonder how Ole Miss's offensive line is going to hold up. And it's not so much a shot at the offensive line because, frankly, it was kind of a concern going into the season, but that has been pushed back because the O-line missed a lot of time in camp together, but the starters have been together for a while, and the offensive line has protected Chambliss pretty well, but each one of Ole Miss's SEC opponents has been in the bottom half of the conference in sacks. And Georgia was last, and I think Kentucky's like second or third to last. So this will be by far Ole Miss's strongest test. One thing, we talked with offensive tackle Jaden Williams, and he said kind of the best comparison for this year's Oklahoma defense was the defense he went against last year in practice, Ole Miss's defensive line, which was just stocked with NFL talent. All those starters went to the NFL. So that'll be interesting, and I'll be curious if Ole Miss's offensive line can continue to protect Chambliss against this front.
Yeah, absolutely. That's some high praise right there. And, I think that's, a huge question mark. OU's D-line is, they'll get after you for sure. And, saw it against with Sellers last week. We've seen it with, Jackson Arnold. Obviously different situation quarterback wise. I think Chambliss is probably the best we've seen so far. So I'm excited to see how that pans out. Let's flip the script a little bit. So Ole Miss's defense, you know, if you had to point out, the sort of question marks here, gave up a lot of points to Georgia, Gunnar Stockton, not exactly if you told me before Saturday that Georgia's going to win in a shootout, I'd be very confused as to how
Yeah,
that happened.
that's right. That's
Uh,
right.
so what are the real question marks with Ole Miss's defense? Some points that you can kind of think the Sooners offense, which is kind of limited given Mateer's thumb injury and a dodgy running game at best. What are some points you think the Sooners can kind of attack here?
Yeah, the Rebels don't get a ton of pressure. And I think that's almost a chicken or the egg situation when discussing the passing defense as well, because it's like, well, can they not, do they get torched in the air because there's no pass rush, or is there no pass rush because they're getting torched through the air? And that's a discussion that maybe it's all connected. But yeah, the defense, Lane Kiffin said it post game. He's like, he compared the way Ole Miss played to a scout team because Georgia had, I think, 4 first downs, which is incredible. Georgia did not do that last week with big play. One guy breaks loose, one guy breaks one tackle. It was methodical march, methodical march, methodical march. Lane Kiffin said, hey, it'd be hard to get 34 first downs against a scout team. And that's what Georgia did. And he said, hey, like Georgia's Georgia, but Georgia is not the number one offense in the SEC. That's not how they've been doing it. So the defense broadly is a concern just because it's looked like that before. Talon Green got this bunch pretty good. Who's a mobile quarterback, and Stockton was looking mobile too, at least against Ole Miss. So I'd be curious what Mateer does, especially with his running ability. Like if his thumb's still hurting and if it's not a huge priority to have him go sling it 40 times, how much could they utilize him in the rushing game?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Because Mateer, I mean, he's run a little bit, but not quite to the same ferocity and frequency that he was doing before the injury. So if he's feeling good enough to go and run a little bit, yeah, that's an opportunity for sure. Quarterback run obviously being a concern. How have other teams use their running backs against Ole Miss successfully? Is there an opportunity, like one of the biggest question marks offensive wise? It's been the running game. What's up with OU? All this sort of stuff. Torrey Blaylock had some success last week. Is there an opportunity to continue off that success, or is OU running into a much stauncher opposition than the Gamecocks?
Yeah, heck, like if this game, I mean, it was played last year, and when Ole Miss had Walter Nolan in there and some of these guys, you may forecast like, man, the OU offense would get shut down. I don't think it's to that point. Ole Miss, the defense hasn't been killed on the ground. They've been respectable there. So I'm not thinking that this will be an opportunity for OU's run game to pop off by any means, probably. Maybe Mateer is the one who kind of pops off, but yeah, I wouldn't expect really either team to get gashed in the running game,
Okay,
which is
yeah,
kind of why I tend to lean lower scoring. I think this game will be like, if we talk about a immobile object versus an immovable force, like I sort of think that the defense for OU maybe wins out a little bit, and we could see a lower scoring game.
yeah. I'm thinking this might end up being a bit of a rock fight, but
Yeah.
that's a game that if you're OU, you feel comfortable with that. So I'm thinking OU. This is a tough call. If we want to, I'm not sure if you're a prediction man. I know some big J journalists, are like, I'm not a prediction
Only
guy.
when I'm right.
There you go. There you go. I'll give my official call on the weekend spread when we make our picks, but where are you leaning at who comes out of Norman with a massive SEC
Yeah.
win?
I think I lean OU, especially in the Palace on the Prairie, just because I think a lower scoring game benefits Oklahoma a little more in a way that Ole Miss has won in shootouts. Aside from last week in Athens, but this team has been a shootout team, and Trinidad Chambliss has been a guy who can win shootouts. And even Kiffin last week said, "Hey, like Chambliss did not lose the game against Georgia. Chambliss was the reason Georgia wasn't a blowout." So I tend to lean OU if I think it's going to be lower scoring, which I'm there, but probably not by much more than a field goal. I think this game is so important to both sides. It'll be interesting.
Yeah, it almost like I don't know if would go as far as calling it a playoff elimination game, just because OU has opportunities if they lose this. But in terms
Yeah.
of if there's a realistic path for Oklahoma, I think it includes winning your home games.
Yeah.
And Ole
You could
Miss,
it's sort of I'll tell you why the other element in Oxford is Ole Miss, regardless of what happens on Saturday, there's a decent shot they win out. They got South Carolina at home, Florida at home, the Citadel at home, the Egg Bowl on the road. But if Ole Miss loses against Oklahoma, its best win on a hypothetical 10-2 resume would be a home game against LSU, which is kind of not looking as good and as good and as good as it once did. So for a team that was on the wrong side of the bubble last year, like Ole Miss was, it would be a tough line and a tough road to travel to be there again and have to win out to be a bubble team. I don't think that this team wants any part of being a bubble team this year.
no, absolutely not. One loss that gets you in the SEC championship conversation. You're talking Atlanta. It puts you in a totally different realm than praying and hoping that your strength of schedule will be enough.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, but in terms of winning out the rest of the way, this is the last trip outside of Mississippi
That's right. It is.
until the postseason. For Ole Miss, it's a gotta have it situation and a bounce back. And for Oklahoma, it's a tough road ahead. Ole Miss, obviously no slouch, eighth in the country, damn good team, but you have to feel like it's relatively attainable when you consider you have trips to Knoxville and Tuscaloosa coming up next. So if you're Oklahoma, it's a gotta win situation. But if you're an OU fan, this is why you joined the SEC. This is some spectacular football we're gonna see on Saturday.
That's right.
Yep. All right, Sam. Thank you so much for coming. Final question, most important question probably of the day. Get back to Oklahoma. What was your first stop? What is your first stop in terms of a coffee shop, a
Hmm.
restaurant? Not to give free press or anything to them. What had you been craving that you'd hit up or will
Yeah,
hit up?
so I got in late last night, like after the double overtime Thunder game, as you know. So my dad picked me up, and I'm just staying with my parents, wanting to see some friends and hanging out with my parents. But the first stop will be Brahms, and that's the stop that I've been proselytizing to everyone else and proclaiming, hey, you got to hit Brahms. When everyone asks me on the Ole Miss beat, where are we stopping? So I'd be remiss if I didn't hit a Brahms on my way out.
Absolutely, and spreading the good word to Brahms to the fine folks of Mississippi. I love that. Sam, thank you so much for your time. Let the good people know where they can find you.
Yeah, I'm on the Clarion Ledger website. If you want some content from the Ole Miss side of this matchup, it'll be coming hot and heavy pretty soon. So appreciate the folks checking it out.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sam. I'll talk to you soon. Have a good one.
Yeah, anytime, my friend. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.